Hello and welcome. Taking this opportunity to go through some of the many comments and questions I've received, which I'm always very happy to do, and find them very encouraging indeed, that many people are endeavouring to practice sila, moral virtue, samadhi, meditation, and panya, developing wisdom, this noble eightfold path, with a view to eradicating our defilements of greed, hatred and delusion, lobha, dosa, moha, and attain to freedom from suffering in this lifetime. Yes, this very lifetime we can attain to nibbana. That is, this freedom from those kilesas, the defilements of greed, hatred and delusion, and disenchantment. From that we get such as we think pleasure from, but come to see as just distraction from the true refuge that we have in the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. The Buddha, our teacher of a long time ago, but his teachings that remain to this day, as brought to us and continued by their practice, the Sangha. His noble lineage of followers and disciples still practicing in the way he taught today, for us to all share our experience and our practice with, to each and one another's mutual benefit and gain. Bringing me to this first comment, he does say, PS, not a serious question, needs not be answered, but a good comment anyway, so I'm going to read it out. Wonderful. How does one get to be one of those families that eat the excess monk food? That sounds like a job worth doing. You are one of those families or people. You can go to any local monastery, and I'm sure that the monks there at the appropriate time in the morning will be happy to share with you the dana, the food that they have been offered, and won't let you go hungry. And anyone wishing to visit me here, send me an email or a comment, and an email is best, then I can share with you my location, and you are likewise also able to be one of those families and come along and share. 108 divided by 4 is 27. Thank you for that. Yes, I said 32. I don't know why. We were talking about mala beads with 108 in their 4 divisions. And my maths, considering I come from a background in the financial services industry, my maths is appalling. Even my finger maths isn't so good because I have half a finger missing, and that confuses my counting. But fortunately, these days I'm not needing to have much in the way of mathematics skills. Hello Bhante, why does some monks become wandering ascetic monks for several years? According to Wiki, Ajahn Chah spent 7 years travelling and lived in tiger and snake infested areas. Is this optional for monks to do, and why would anyone do this? Yes, in this day and age it is to some extent optional, because you would go to live in a monastery for your first 5 years of training. After ordination as a bhikkhu, you stay usually with your teacher, whom these days would be in your original training monastery, which is perhaps not going to be affected by things like tigers and snakes. after which you are free to go and perhaps wander off to maybe find other teachers, or remain dependent on your teacher, but go on, we call it in the Pali language charaka, but it's become known as Tudong practice from a Thai adaptation of the word Dhutanga, which is the Pali word for ascetic practices, where you wander alone. Now this is going back to how monks would have lived in the time of the Buddha, before the establishment of monasteries, when they were wandering ascetics in India at the time, who came across the Buddha and the teachings of the Buddha. After ordination, would have continued with the Buddha wandering. The Buddha himself wandered for most of his teaching years, only remaining, as is now the custom, to stay in the same place for the 3 months of the monsoon time, which is coming up in the full moon of July, when we as bhikkhus are required to stay in that one place, a single place, for that 3 months, to protect us really and our practice from the rain, the poor weather conditions for wandering, and also to protect where we're walking and what we're walking through. For instance, the forests, the jungles, the farmland can become quite damaged with many people or monks wandering around whilst the ground is very wet and fragile. So we stay in one place, a good time to practice, and normally we arrange this place in advance so that we have the necessary support in place, that is food, clothing, shelter, medicine, our 4 requisites, basic requisites, which is all we need to live, and that is practiced to this day. Some, however, decide that we, as I do, prefer, rather than living in a community, which I have done also for off and on for many years, to practice alone in solitude, and therefore take this opportunity to wander. In my case, usually settling in one place for quite some time. This I've settled here, I've been here now for 8 months, which is the longest I've stayed in any one particular place so far since I ordained, other than my main monastery that I was, whilst wandering in India, always returning to every 15 days for the Uposatha. Now that's a little bit more difficult, being that I'm in a different country, so I remain dependent on them and in contact with them for their support, and live alone here. I too, no tigers, but there are snakes, many snakes and other venomous creatures. This is out of choice. Why should anyone choose to do this? As I was talking of the kilesas, I think, a minute ago, these are our defilements of greed, hatred and delusion that we're trying to gradually erode through our practice. And one way to do this is to take our lives into a little more of or a less comfortable environment and situation. Not to be permanently living in fear, but to be having to remain continually mindful of our surroundings. When not closeted with comfort and security, when living in the open air. I lived outside technically, but within the protective environment of, let's say, 4 van walls, an old empty van, for 3 years in the UK before moving to India, where for the next 3 years, mostly I was living outside completely, not even with a van or a kuti, just on the hillsides, in the coastal areas and in the forests. Other than when I went to stay at the monastery for the one night of the Uposatha. And this is very conducive to your practice. You remain alert, less prone to lethargy and laziness, not only because you're continuously reminded of the fragile nature of life itself, and therefore enabling this practice of Marananusati, the contemplation of death. You need to be alert, you need to be awake in order to protect you from these said tigers, snakes and infested areas. It's very important for your well-being. This is by way of helping to erode these kilesas of ours, of greed, hatred and delusion. The older you are, in my case was late 40s when I came into this way of living, the more perhaps habitual tendencies you've established over a lifetime to go seeking things out of your natural greed, to distract yourself by way of sensual pleasures through natural desire, and also to avoid and have aversion, get away from things you don't like, push away. This is natural, this is nature, this is the defilements that to some extent are there to protect our well-being and keep us alive in the first instance. Sensual desire for us to have the incentive to go out and get food, for instance, and eat, and also to find partners and procreate and further our species. And then also fear, aversion, to make us stay away where possible from danger. But of course this becomes to a lesser degree a protection and more just a distraction from things that we don't like, finding entertainment, for instance, to take our minds off things, or even abuse of our mindfulness and our faculties by taking intoxicants of drugs or alcohol or something of that nature. But by very far the easiest way of distracting ourselves we could use as a thing to identify these days would be sheer entertainment that people hold in the palm of their hand with smartphones. It's, the sixth hindrance to our practice, where you have continual and easily accessible, let's say, distraction in the palm of your hand by means of one of these devices. Now, of course, living in these more hostile environments, this isn't necessarily the case. There's usually not internet, not so readily or easily accessible and available, and the facilities to charge up these things isn't available. So it's a lot more difficult. This is a modern aspect to it, but even back in the time of the Buddha, when wandering and carrying out these various Dhutanga practices, there are only 13, I say only, although that's a lot, they're quite difficult. The 13 Dhutanga practices, ascetic practices, were the ascetic practices the Buddha allowed his bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, his monks and nuns, to continue to practice. He didn't want us taking on or continuing, or his monks continuing with some of the other ascetic practices that have gone on through the ages and still to this day do in places like India, where maybe you don't wear any clothes, or you stand on one leg for 10 years, or you, never close your eyes, or you just, stare at the sun, these kind of dangerous things. He wants us to be kind to ourselves. So one of these practices is we live just simply outside, a wanderer's charaka practice of under a tree, the shelter of a tree, a cave, an empty building is usually my favourite, or we can live in a monastery, of course. So our places to live can be in a community in a monastery. I prefer not to. I find that is a distraction in itself with all the duties. When you have more than one person living together, the duties don't just double. In fact, they multiply perhaps by 4, and when you have more than 4 people, you have half a dozen people, the duties increase. It's not like sharing the duties makes it easier. In fact, if you live alone, you have very little to do. Once I've eaten, I've washed up my bowl, I have nothing else to do. Maybe occasionally have to wash my robes, shave my head. We have specific days to do this, so that's only twice a month, every 15 days. Other than that, my time is free to practice. So this is why we take on these practices of wandering and don't mind these hostile and infested areas, hostile environments, because it is more than made up for by the availability of time that it frees us up to have in order to just simply devote ourselves to meditation. Right, okay. So I'll skip that one because it's way too long to read now. I'll have to find the question in there. Do you have advice on how to stop? Do you have an advice on how to stop identifying with one's body, physical appearance? Yes. How to stop identifying with it is quite easy. Cut something off, not your finger, but I mean, I used to be someone, a layperson with 10 fingers and, 8 fingers, isn't it, and 2 thumbs. 10 digits, let's say. And I thought this finger was me. Then it was cut off. Did I change? No. Was that finger still me? No. But don't do that. Just cut a piece of hair off. Put it in the sink. Is that hair now still beautiful? Is it you? No, it's just horrible hair in the sink. If you have a partner, you might find their hair with soap in the sink. But you might find them very attractive. They have beautiful hair, lovely hair. Isn't that beautiful? I like the feel of it and this. Do you like this hair in the sink with the soap in the wash hand basin or the bucket, whatever you have? Is that nice? No, it's horrible. Fingernails, very beautiful, manicured or whatever, but on the floor or on your dinner plate, for instance. Is that nice? No. So this is the difference. You're seeing for reality what we are when it's separate from what's not keeping alive, because nails, fingernails, hair, most of what we can see, hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth and skin, these are the 5 things we are taught to meditate on as newly ordained monks. Hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth and skin, because they're the things on a body we can see. All of those things are in fact on the surface dead, but they are also on the surface that keeps us protected, or our eyes, from what's underneath, which is quite horrible, isn't it? If you think about peeling all of the skin off of yourself or your partner, how would that look? Not very nice, quite frightening in fact. Certainly not attractive, not something you'd like to hug or kiss, but it is there, it is the truth. When you can see this reality, the truth, you'll stop identifying so much with what you perceive to be your physical appearance. Also, this physical appearance is continually changing. It is never satisfactory, so it's anicca, one of the characteristics of existence, impermanent. It's dukkha, it is suffering, by the very fact that you will never be satisfied with it. You'll always be doing something to it. Even if you are very satisfied with the appearance and your looks, and you don't age, or you've aged well and you feel that you're doing very well, just stop washing this body, washing this hair for 1, 2, 3 days or something, and see how it is losing its appeal so very quickly. Even after a very short while, it becomes unappealing, unattractive. And this in itself helps you identify and realize that it is not what you are attached to. It is your false impression that you're attached to of beauty, which is underlying or overlaying, in fact, very superficially. It's just a veneer overlaying, which is quite unbeautiful, unattractive, unappealing, and something we would pull away from and try to not draw our attention to. And it is by not drawing our attention to, and by covering up with makeup and other effects, that we delude ourselves, thus fueling this third defilement of delusion, which is just ignorance to the truth. But when we see the characteristics of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, that this anatta is not self, that this body, this physical body, and this thinking brain even, is merely just the result of causes and conditions we've put in place in this life and in past lives for us to be in the situation that we are in the current moment here and now, as it is, if you can see that, you're seeing the truth. And this truth is that. So it's just that. It cannot be argued with. It's not something to be believed. It's not something to try and understand. Just don't wash, for instance, for one day. And sit down here to talk to your friend or talk to some people, and you will see the results of that inaction. You will soon lose those friends, and you probably won't like yourself much. So you keep yourself clean, healthy, and at least pleasant for other people to be around, as they are doing also, in order that we maintain to cultural norms. But if you were living alone in the forest, you probably would need to do so a lot less. Another good reason for living alone in the forest, perhaps. But these are ways that you identify or stop identifying with your body and your physical appearance. If you have a bit of a habit, a tendency to be looking at the mirror, or these days I think people look at their phones, don't they? To see themselves, then take the mirrors away. Don't look at yourself in the phone. These are unnecessary things to do. As monks, we don't have mirrors. We learn to shave our heads even and our faces by mindfulness, by how it feels. We don't need to see that. After all, when you're shaving in the mirror, you can't see the back of your head anyway, can you? You might with a complicated arrangement of more than one mirror, but which way your hand movements would be going, I do not know. So one has no mirrors, you're not looking at yourself occasionally, rarely in countries like this because they don't have shop windows. But one thing I found quite disturbing in my short visit to England a couple of years ago was the many shop windows that have reflections of the street in as you walk by. And seeing my own reflection, not having ever seen myself dressed like this, other than in pictures which seem to be somewhat separate, but moving along, seeing a reflection of myself in the shop window, I thought, wow, there's a monk. I don't expect to see a monk. And then, of course, very quickly realized, it's my reflection. Wow, that's what I look like. And suddenly I was self-conscious of what I looked like in my mother's village or little town where there's a couple of shops nearby. I thought, oh dear, I do look so out of place, don't I? Never having worn this kind of, people don't walk around looking like this where my mother lives, that's for sure. But I thought, well, I've been walking around for a couple of weeks like this now and nobody's said anything, so carry on. But only did I become self-conscious when I saw that reflection. Before that, I've forgotten. Like here, I forget that I'm a completely different colour to everybody else. I know we hear a lot spoken about these days, about colour and this and that, but it's something that I don't ever think about, and sometimes find it unusual when people look at me or I'm singled out as different, not in an unkind way, but people, for instance, if someone asks where I am, people can always tell people where I am. And I think, well, how do they know there's so many monks here? How do people always find me so quickly? Because they'll miss me on Arms Round and then they'll go whizzing round on their scooters to find me and catch up, you see. I think, how does that happen? But of course, I'm a completely different, I'm pale, I'm very light and white. I'm naturally blonde-haired colour, so I've got pale skin too, so I'm probably like an albino almost looking by comparison. But this I don't see because I don't have mirrors. So I think I'm the same as everybody else here, the same colour as them. They don't, of course. I'm very different. So this is how you detach from that identification. And it's a very important part of the practice because this is understanding the whole basis of anatta, this third of these characteristics, not self, that we're not what we think we are. This is very impermanent and unsatisfactory and out of our control. It is not self. What is self? What is not self? What is unconditioned by these physical bodies and this thinking brain, is that which knows awareness, conscious awareness, or our mind, if you like to call it that, or the citta, that is influenced by all of our actions of body, speech and mind, because those we call karma are what fuel, determine and govern the direction in which that consciousness is going to go. This is how our actions affect our awareness or our consciousness directly. All that we do, good or bad, will have consequences, are the causes and conditions we're putting in place for our next moment, to be experienced, yes, by these physical bodies and thinking brains, through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching and hearing, and all of our emotional responses of thinking in terms of cognitive behavior and thinking, understanding and association with what we like and what we don't like, brought about through memory and past experience, all comes about within these, as I've spoken of at length recently, these khandhas that makes up this, what we consider to be ourself. But none of this is part of that which sees, that which is aware of all this, the knower, the citta, that is only influenced in terms of its direction, where it's going next, by your actions of body, speech and mind. But only in that sense propelled into future attachment, future actions of the body, the speech and the mind, to fuel again this cycle of rebirth, in this sense like one can compare it to addiction. So you look in the mirror, you see yourself not looking good, so you improve how you look. Then you've immediately, by that action, increased the incentive to do that again in the future, because you consider it to have worked in terms that it made you feel better immediately. Having seen yourself in the mirror not looking good, done something to yourself, changed your appearance, made yourself look to what you consider to be good, albeit very superficial, you will then fuel that tendency to do that very same action again and again and again. But it is a never-ending battle that you cannot win. You will get old, you will get sick, you will die. And the mirror will only tell you the truth. However much makeup, however much changing you do to your appearance, even to some extent with our minds, this is our brains, our thinking brains, this is the case. However much we educate these thinking brains, however many books we read, the end result will be the same. We will get old, we will get sick, we will die. These bodies will deteriorate and become unattractive and uncomfortable, painful, and eventually unable to continue supporting us, unable to continue living. These brains will lose their faculties, some more quickly than others, and to them too will lose the ability to retain the information that they could whilst they were younger. This is the natural process of aging, sickness and death. It is inherent in birth. We are born with this terminal illness of life itself, which ends in death. This is all about understanding and unidentifying yourself from just this body and this physical appearance. I was reading in the Vinaya, and it states there is a prohibition against monks eating garlic. Please talk about this. Yes, so it's a very minor rule in the Vinaya. We have the Patimokkha, the 227 rules of a bhikkhu. And there are 311 for the bhikkhuni, the lady monk, the nun. It's not included in there, but in the Vinaya there are thousands of rules, and within that there are So those 227 rules of the Patimokkha are our precepts. So as lay people, you have 5 precepts. Maybe if you stay in a meditation, in a monastery, or even sometimes on a meditation retreat, you extend those to 8 precepts, merely adding no entertainment, no sexual activity, and no eating in the afternoon. No beautification or makeup or this kind of thing either. These are to support the core precepts, but as monks we have far many more. In the Vinaya itself there are thousands of rules and conditions and ways to live, again just to support those core precepts so that we don't break any of the essential rules of killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or taking of intoxicants. In the Vinaya, these rules all came about as a result of experiences during the establishment of the Sangha, during the 45 years of the Buddha's teaching. And in that time, as there were problems, in this case, monk sitting to one side, he questioned as to why you're sitting to one side. I'm not sure why specifically on that occasion, because on every occasion they say the monk sat to one side. But in this particular sutta, he said he's sitting to one side. Why is he sitting to one side? They say because he's been eating garlic and doesn't want to offend you. Assuming one is offended by the smell of garlic on someone's breath, I'm not sure that particularly it is these days that offensive or considered such. Maybe in the West it was, maybe a long time ago because we weren't used to it, but more commonly it's something you don't notice. Most people who have been eating garlic would not notice if others have been eating garlic. However, this was the question that arose. So the Buddha said, from now on then we won't eat garlic, because it could be offensive to lay people if you're giving a Dharma talk. This is the wonder of YouTube, isn't it? You don't know if I've been eating garlic or not. But with regards to this, he also said, as with all of the Vinaya rules, however, in the case of sickness, it is appropriate to take garlic on its own because it's a good antibiotic, and in which case it's a good medicine. So it's actually allowable as one of our medicines, a tonic or a medicine. And you'll see in many monasteries they have this kind of dried garlic you can eat as a little snack, really, which is rather quite tasty. I tend not to, because it is rather tasty and could become quite a useful snack. And he specifically says, however, one cannot be using these medicines, these tonics, as when you enjoy them, as that, for something as a snack to enjoy. So this is also another Vinaya rule. But he did essentially bring about this rule about garlic, which in the Mahayana tradition has been extended to all pungent, I don't think they're quite called vegetables, but things that, like, it actually goes as far as including leeks, because they're kind of part of the onion family. So all Mahayana monks, even on Pindapata, they refuse food of that nature. However, in the Theravada tradition, we are not allowed to refuse anything other than raw foods, and certain particular, there's very few foods that we have to refuse. But usually we just accept anything, food that is offered. And it is most often, I think it would be very hard for Theravada monks to avoid garlic, because we're in countries like Thailand, India, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, where most foods contain at least some garlic. And we would just be saying, we wouldn't get any food in our bowl. You can't be that picky and fussy. People are giving us food. So we do not have the opportunity, where they're not familiar with this particular very minor hidden array rule, in the Theravada tradition, very minor rule, infringement, we'd find it very difficult. With things like meat and such like, even those, we accept them. But it's easy out of choice, if you're a vegetarian or even vegan, to put those aside in your bowl or take them out and offer them to someone else later on. It's easy to avoid. But something like garlic, which is usually cut up very finely and incorporated in the cooking process, very difficult to avoid, really. So, the question... So yeah, I mean, if you're of the Mahayana tradition, I did actually ask you where you'd read that, because it's hard to find that in the Theravada, in the Vinaya Pitaka, in the Pali Canon. That's the Theravada version of the Tipitaka, as opposed to the Sanskrit Mahayana version, where there are more, there's more discussion. I don't know, I'm not a Mahayana monk, so I don't know why, but they're quite strict on this aspect of it. But certainly in Theravada traditions, no, we can eat garlic and do. The options, well, I don't think I've been able to live here. I've lived in these countries for nearly 10 years now, on food that's been given to me. And if I wouldn't have had enough time in the day to go about being fussy refusing garlic. And if I'd been able to do so, then I probably would have had very little to eat, because I think most foods have garlic in there. There are also other aspects in some other cultures that bring into the reasoning behind it a lot of other religions or other philosophies' bases. Like, for instance, garlic and onions increases, lust, ragha tanha, so lust. That's really to be debated, isn't it? This is more a Hindu idea, coming from Ayurvedic and the Vedas, that their meditation would be affected by taking of such. It's almost an intoxicant for them. However, that's not the reasoning behind this rule in the Vinaya, and it's a very minor rule. Anyway, I don't know where I'd be without garlic. I think the food that I eat would be very bland. Which country you live in? Sri Lanka. Well, we think we all know that now by now. Okay. How do I make a good living in order to rack up money to move to Thailand to ordain as a monk? Because there are no monasteries in my country. How did you move to Thailand smoothly, and how can we do it? Please share. Does not have to be Thailand, but any other Theravada country. Okay. So the answer to that question is just take the 8 precepts. That's it. But you might want some more explanation on that. So as soon as you take 8 precepts, so you refrain from entertainment, of course you're keeping the 5 precepts, so you're not taking alcohol, but you change the 3rd precept of sexual misconduct to refraining from any sexual activity whatsoever. Therefore you stop dating and having relationships. You immediately, and also you're not eating in the afternoon, you immediately save yourself one whole lot of money. Most of the money people spend these days is on those things you're not allowed to do when you take 8 precepts. Now I appreciate that also you have the roof over your head, maybe a rent to pay, a mortgage to pay. You have various expenses associated with, actually, you will find, getting to work. So I asked this question of a monk a long time ago. He said, why don't you come every day? Because I was just going on Sundays. He said, you don't come on Saturday? I said, I work Saturdays. And he said, what about other days? I said, no, I work 6 days a week. He said, well, why? I said, well, I need to pay for this, pay for that. When he broke it all down, and we broke it all down, I was working a lot of hours to pay to go to work and to keep the place where I was living in order to live there, to be able to go to work. And simply, I had to let go of all those notions, get a very simple job, from a well-paid job down to a minimum wage job, where I could, though, to some extent, choose the hours I was doing. So I chose to just work 3 days a week, but do 3 12-hour shifts on minimum wage. And that meant the rest of the time I had free. I could do my 3 12-hour shifts in 3 days, actually giving me then a whole load of time a whole sort of Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It was the other way around. It worked out so I was free during the week. It's often the case in Western countries. So I was free all week and just worked weekends basically, just to meditate. Now, as long as you're not going out seeking relationships, going to restaurants, eating lots of luxurious foods and living very simply, you will save, even if you stop your well-paid job and get a minimum wage job, as long as you can afford your accommodation, then you will save a whole lot of money very, very quickly. It's as simple as that. Now, I took it a stage further. I got rid of my accommodation as well, because that was my biggest overhead, and just lived outside in a van, which I ended up doing for 3 years because I enjoyed doing so. Living on just pasta and potatoes, tinned tomatoes. No, not so much tinned tomatoes. They became unavailable during some of the COVID times. So just whatever I could get hold of, really. But it was basically, and the pasta became unavailable too. So it was basically potatoes I was living on with seasoning and whatever vegetables I could find in the local shops from time to time. This was before I was a monk. But I wasn't eating meat, eggs, cheese. These are expensive things. Milk, it's all expensive. You can live on bread, potatoes. Don't have butter with your bread, that's expensive. You can live very cheaply. You can go to the supermarkets. I don't know about other countries, but in England you can buy there. Now, without COVID and things, everything's now normal. I think you can buy tins of whatever, baked beans or tinned tomatoes for literally pennies or rupees. Very, very low in cost. Might not be overly tasty, but we're not eating to taste. We're eating to keep our bodies alive, to practice meditation. Now, you only need to do this really, not for 3 years like I did, for a few months, and you'll save a whole lot of money. You can also, in this process of letting go, giving up, bearing in mind you want to go to Thailand and practice and become a monk, you also get rid of a lot of your things. You don't have to give everything away. That's not the idea. You can sell things, put the money in the bank, add to your savings. If you're looking to buy your ticket to fly from where you are to Thailand or to whatever country, it won't take long at all. If you sell your TV, you sell your, I don't know whether people have stereos these days, sell your microwave even. You don't need that anymore. That's an expensive way of buying food that goes in the microwave. Just simply boil potatoes in a pan on a stove. Sell everything. Sell your bed, sleep on the floor. Sell your sofa, sit on the floor. This is what I did. You're asking me to share? I'm sharing. I got rid of everything. What I didn't give away, I sold, and the money bought me my flight tickets to Thailand. I did still have this part-time job and had to keep going back and forth. So that was quite a few tickets to Thailand that I bought. You can find also very cheap ways of flying. You can fly, if you're very diligent about it, and these days online it's easy to do so, you can fly to the other side of the world for a quarter of the price that you might expect, but it just might take a very long time. Sometimes it would take me 3 or 4 days to fly from London to Bangkok. Now it actually only takes, I think it takes 12 or 14 hours direct flight, but if you want to go via Istanbul, China, or even when you fly to India, going via, you can go anyway. Wherever you're flying to, wherever you're flying from, you can put it all together using different apps and this and that and the other and fly very cheaply. So you don't need to be cashed up. You just need to have enough to get there and know that you've got a monastery or a few monasteries where you can go and try and stay for a few days, where you will be looked after. Very basically, but you will be fed and looked after. So I hope that answers the question. I don't think I'm not going to, I don't run, I say I'm running out of time. I'm not actually running out of time. I just think if the videos go on for too long, they'll take a long time to upload, but they'll also, I think maybe people only watch for a certain amount of time. They only have a certain amount of time to watch these things. So it's best to keep them in 40 to 50 minute sections. Anyway, I don't know what time I started, so I'll just look at this question. Bhanteji, if you give subtitles in Hindi, your channel will become too popular. So whatever. I think, and this gentleman's asked me this a couple of times about putting subtitles in Hindi. I don't do anything to these videos, especially as far as subtitles are concerned. This is something YouTube does automatically, and you do automatically. You go to the settings when you're watching the video, go to settings, and then captions. They don't call it subtitles for some reason. Captions, and then I had to do this to find it, to see if Hindi was there. Sinhalese isn't, unfortunately, but Hindi is definitely there. I knew that, so I went to find out how you do it. You go settings when you're watching the video, particular video in question. Captions, and then you go auto-translate, and then you just pick from a whole list of languages, one of which is Hindi. Bing, and then they come up in, it comes in Hindi script, whatever you call that. I'm not sure how accurate it is. I'd suggest you go to my monastery in Bangalore, the Mahabodhi Society, where they offer Dharma teachings in Hindi, and many of the Indian local state languages. So in Karnataka, where they're based in Bangalore, they have a lot of Kannada language Dharma talks, and in most of the other states where they are, they will talk in their local language also, as well as English and Hindi. So it's a very good resource for you. Go to the Mahabodhi Society Bangalore and follow their channel or their website and visit their branches. But for my own talks, you can just click those subtitles. So I hope that's clear for everybody and easy to do. Maybe with the newer videos, no, it is, because I tried on a new video too. It's quite quickly that this is done. It happens automatically. Where in the world can I move to devote my life to studying Buddhism? To your floor. So if you're currently sitting on your desk chair, or your sitting room, laying on your sofa watching or listening to this, or on your bed, now get off of that, and where in the world to devote yourself to a life of studying Buddhism? It's the floor. Get down there on the floor, sit upright like this so you're awake, put all the books away, turn the phone off, whatever talk you're listening to, until it's this one. Let me finish. At least your question anyway. And study what the Buddha taught us to study. And that is what can be seen and found within this fathom-length bag of skin containing bones and all sorts of unattractive things that we consider to be ourselves, but we also can learn so much from. When you sit on the floor like this and just close your eyes, you are beginning to practice meditation. This is how we dedicate our lives to studying Buddhism, and this alone, with keeping the precepts, is how we develop wisdom. This is how we become enlightened. You don't need to travel the world to do this. You don't need to get on a plane. Just get off your bed and onto the floor, close your eyes and see what happens. Now, your body will give you all sorts of uncomfortable feelings. See these uncomfortable feelings for what they are. Impermanent. As they arise, maybe irritate you for a while and pass away. Also, your mind will jump from one thing to another. Lots of subjects, fantasies, planning of the future, regrets about the past will come into play in your mind. Watch this all happening in this thinking brain and see this as just thoughts arising, staying for a while, maybe leading on to another thought, linking to this, linking to that, like a endless chain of events establishing themselves as something you believe to be real in your mind. Just say stop, bring your attention to one thing, the breath, breathing in, breathing out, and one moment now. Neither the past, which has gone and cannot be changed, or the future, which hasn't even happened yet and might not. Just bring your awareness and your attention into this present moment, here and now. This is where you can dedicate your life to studying Buddhism. Here and now, wherever that may be, in this present moment. So if you're in London, UK, off your bed, off your sofa, onto the floor, sit down. If you're in a mud hut in southern India, similarly, stay sitting on the floor because you probably were already, and don't think about walking off to the nearest temple to hear all sorts of noises and bells ringing and chanting going on. Just stay exactly where you are. Close your eyes and meditate. This is how we study Buddhism. Now, of course, it also helps in conjunction with that, if and when you can, to read some suttas. But you don't need to go anywhere in the world for that. Not these days. If you're talking to me via this, by whichever means, you have access to the internet. It is all there. The suttas are there to be read, each and every one of them. All of the schools and traditions are there. Theravada, I don't know the other traditions, but there is Sutta Central. I think it covers other traditions also, but it's a way of accessing particular suttas. But you can also download books, teachings, studies, listen to Dharma talks about suttas, people reading suttas and discussion on suttas. It's all there, here and now, wherever you may be. So enjoy that travel, enjoy that journey where you are, going nowhere, studying, dedicating your life to studying Buddhism. I hope that answers your question and allays your need to travel, because this is often just another desire to run away from what we don't like where we are, thinking that we'll find something better in another place. Grass is always greener is the English expression applied to sheep who are eating lovely green grass but keep looking over the fence thinking the grass in the field next door is better, until they get there and find it is exactly the same grass. And then they're looking back over the fence at the old field they were in. This is what we're doing when we keep going from one place to another. I've tried for many years to stay in one place. Because of my age, I had to go abroad for my ordination and tried to stay in that place, but because of visas couldn't. Now I hope and think it's possible I can just stay here, and this is what I'm doing because I don't have to travel. And it's a Buddhist country. If you want to travel to Buddhist countries, you can do so also, but it won't necessarily be any easier to study and dedicate your life to Buddhism there, whether a monk or a lay person, than it is in, I don't know where you are, but in my country, for instance, where in fact resources are more readily available, access to information and teaching in my language, my mother tongue, is more readily available in the UK than I will find it here. I will not find much support in terms of, in this country where I am at the moment, in terms of mainly what I'm interested in, and that is meditation. My practice is very much Sila Samadhi Panya. I don't want to spend a long time learning all of the chanting and the ceremonies that go on in places like here and in other Buddhist countries day to day for a good part of the day. That is of no interest to me whatsoever. I've had quite a lot of experience in that, as enough as is necessary to establish a firm grounding in these reflections in terms of Buddhism and the practice and the cultures that they're operating within, but that is enough for me. So the resources are often not necessarily where you think they might be. But in this day and age, most things are available to you on what can be that distraction, the smartphone, but also a very useful tool, as a layperson that is, to have access to all of these teachings. So on that note, I should leave it there and hope there's something you can use and share with others. If not, just let it go and don't let it bother you. Thanks for joining me, and hope to speak to you again soon next time. Be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.